Welcome, you wonderful, wonderful people, to this final video analysing Act 2, Scene 2 of Macbeth. We're going to focus on the very final parts of this scene. We're going to have a look to see how Lady Macbeth is presented. What we focus on today is how does Lady Macbeth react when Macbeth returns from the murder. What I'm looking for is for all of you to understand what happens at the end of Act 2, Scene 2, to really understand the dialogue, and to consider how Lady Macbeth is presented differently to Macbeth. Because Macbeth, as we've seen in previous videos, is overcome with emotion. He feels so much guilt that his whole body seems to shut down. His mind cannot cope with the evil that he's committed. Whereas Lady Macbeth seems to be cold and calculating, seems to think even more clearly amidst all of the pressure. What we focus on today is how those two characters act completely differently to each other. What we've looked at in Act 2, Scene 2 so far then, is how Lady Macbeth begins the scene on her own, talking about how she doubts her husband and whether or not he has the conviction necessary to commit regicide, whether or not he's strong enough to commit the murder. And then, when Macbeth returns, he seems overwrought with emotion. He seems to feel so much guilt that his mind is preoccupied and he cannot think clearly. The final thing we analyse together is Lady Macbeth getting frustrated with her husband because he seems weak, and also she then begins to use lots of imperative verbs, telling her husband exactly what he needs to do in order to get away with this murder. She says things like, "Go get some water and wash this filthy witness from your hands," suggesting that she thinks a little bit of water will take away the blood and that will solve the problem. Not quite understanding that that will not wash away the guilt that Macbeth seems to feel. Also, she gets frustrated because Macbeth made a mistake. He took the daggers away from the place, and Lady Macbeth knows that those daggers need to stay there. And then finally she says, "Go carry them and smear the sleepy grooms with blood." So whilst Macbeth cannot think clearly in the aftermath of this murder, Lady Macbeth is able to think clearly. She's cold, she's callous, she's very calculating. She knows exactly what needs to be done in order to get away with this crime. In response to this very clear and calm, instructional mode of speaking, Macbeth refuses. He says he can't. He cannot do what Lady Macbeth wants him to do. He says, "I'll go no more. I am afraid to think what I have done. Look on it again, I dare not." Macbeth seems to be stricken by the guilt that he feels. He cannot comprehend this evil action that he's been able to commit, and it renders him almost speechless. He cannot move, he cannot do what Lady Macbeth is requesting for him to do. Saying, "I'll go no more," shows that he simply cannot comply with what she wants him to do. He doesn't have the resolve, he doesn't have the strength. He's so stricken by his guilt that he feels like he cannot do anything. He can't move past this event. When he says, "I am afraid to think what I have done," he admits to fear. He admits to being afraid. This is completely different to the Macbeth we saw in Act 1, Scene 2, when he was slicing through his opponents, when he was carving out a passage to meet the knave. He's admitting to his fear. And that's in clear juxtaposition to how Lady Macbeth is presented, because Lady Macbeth is not afraid. Lady Macbeth is cold and unemotional. We have a gender swap here. We have the female acting like a masculine figure, and the masculine figure seems to demonstrate the weakness of resolve. When he says to think what I have done, that shows his mental anguish. That shows that it is his mind that is holding him back. There is physically nothing wrong with this person, but his mental weakness is clearly shown because he cannot deal with the evil of his own actions. And we may consider Macbeth truly understands the evil that he's committed, whereas Lady Macbeth doesn't believe in the same moral philosophy that Macbeth does, and therefore doesn't see this as such a massive issue. He then finishes his small little speech by saying, "Look on it again, I dare not." And again, that adds in to the fact that this person cannot deal with these emotions and shows his weakness, shows his lack of resolve, because he cannot deal with the aftermath of his actions. He's appalled. He's appalled by what he's seen. He's appalled by himself. He's appalled that he has been able to do what no man should ever do. He's acted against the divine right of kings, and he's committed regicide, the worst of all the crimes. He knows this evil that he's committed, and if you look at what he says in that entire little speech there, it's all monosyllabic. I'll go no more. I am afraid to think that I have done. What we see is somebody who almost cannot speak. Very short monosyllabic expression, almost showing that he's been stunned. He cannot believe what he has done. Lady Macbeth responds to this weakness, and what she says is this: infirm of purpose, give me the daggers. The sleeping and the dead are but as pictures. 'Tis the eye of childhood that fears a painted devil. If he do bleed, I'll gild the faces of the grooms withal, for it must seem their guilt. You can see that Lady Macbeth gives him no sympathy, no warmth, no kindness. She doesn't act in the way a wife should act towards their husband, providing moral support. Lady Macbeth, if anything, becomes frustrated with him, frustrated with his weakness, frustrated with his lack of masculinity. She says infirm of purpose, suggesting that this weakness inside of Macbeth is like an illness. It's like he's diseased in some way. And she doesn't like the fact that he has no resolve. She shows absolutely no compassion towards him at all, and if anything, she becomes frustrated with him. She becomes frustrated with his purpose. She becomes angry at his inability to fulfill this duty. It was Macbeth's job to go and kill the king. And now that he's messed up the plan, she gets frustrated because he wasn't able to fulfill that promise that he made. She becomes frustrated. She sees his moral conscience as weakness. Most people would consider a conscience a good thing. It keeps people from doing evil. Lady Macbeth believes that that is his biggest weakness. And it links back to when she was worried about him being too full of the milk of human kindness. And then, after a very short statement there, very short sentence, she then says, give me the daggers. Another imperative verb being used, giving a clear command to her husband. And here she implicates herself in the crime. She becomes complicit now. She's part of this. She's taking action. If Macbeth can't do it right, she's going to do it herself. So she takes this masculine role. Give me the daggers. And again, notice that first person personal pronoun. Give me the daggers. Because where Macbeth fails, Lady Macbeth is going to prove that she can do it and do it better than her husband. She then makes this statement. She considers the sleeping and the dead are but as pictures. She's able to rationalize what she sees. What she says is that, well, sleeping people look no different to dead people. They look the same. Their eyes are closed, they don't move. So she's able to think, well, I'll just pretend the dead people are sleeping. And that's simple. She's able to conquer her thoughts, conquer her mind, whereas Macbeth cannot move past the guilt that he feels. And then she uses the simile, they are but as pictures. Again, Macbeth shouldn't be scared of people who don't move, because pictures don't move, and you wouldn't be scared of a picture like you wouldn't be scared of a sleeping person. So she is able to conquer her thoughts in her mind, whereas Macbeth isn't able to do that. And then she insults him. She insults him because she thinks 'tis the eye of childhood that fears a painted devil. She's calling him a child. She's saying that he's being childish. She's insulting Macbeth's fear as being juvenile, being something that children would be scared of, and that Macbeth should know better. Because in childhood, we might fear a painted devil. We might be scared of pictures of evil. But as adults, we should be able to conquer those emotions. She's identifying Macbeth's weakness because she does not feel the same. And here we see that clear juxtaposition. Macbeth is so stricken by what he's seen that he can't go back in the room, whereas Lady Macbeth finds it quite easy to go back into the room to drop off these daggers. She then says, "If he do bleed, I'll gild the faces of the grooms withal." What she says here is that she's happy to go back into this room, and with all of the blood of Duncan that seems to be all over him and all over his bed, what she's going to do is she's going to cover the grooms with blood to make it look like they are the people who have killed Duncan. This is part of her plan. To gild means to plate. Often people gild metal. What they'll do is they'll plate a metal, that's very simple metal, with gold to make it look different. Here what she's doing is almost the opposite way. We have an innocent person being smeared with blood. So instead of making a boring metal look pretty, what she's going to do is make an innocent person look guilty. And she says, "I'll gild the faces of the grooms withal, for it must seem their guilt." And consider how calculating she is here. She's completely happy to pass on her guilt, pass on Macbeth's guilt, onto someone completely innocent. Let them take the repercussions. Let them be killed for those actions, even though they've done nothing wrong at all. She's quite happy to allow somebody else to take the responsibility. And that makes her sound quite predatory. It makes her sound strong, it makes her sound violent, it makes her sound brutal, and it makes those people who are innocent look weak. And those people are the ones who are going to get killed. In Lady Macbeth's mind, it seems to be that she thinks that strong people have good things, strong people get to advance, whereas at the time in a Jacobean society, people liked the idea of good people being rewarded. What we see on screen at the moment is two people who have done something evil, and they are going to prosper from it. What Lady Macbeth then does is she goes off and she takes those daggers and she smears the blood on those grooms. But there's a knock within. There's a little bit of noise coming from inside the castle, which is to be expected, and this accelerates a little bit. But this knock then allows then makes Macbeth start to become stressed and start to become very worried that he's going to be discovered. After the knocking that comes from the castle somewhere, Macbeth then speaks. "Whence is that knocking? How is't with me when every noise appalls me? What hands are here? They pluck out mine eyes. Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clear from my hand? No. This my hand will rather the multitudinous seas in Incarnadine. Making the green one red." After Macbeth speaks alone, Lady Macbeth then returns from depositing those daggers. This very short monologue really emphasizes Macbeth's guilt and how he doesn't believe that he will ever be able to return to the level of innocence that he once enjoyed. He will never be the good person that he once was. He is now doomed to a life of guilt. With the knowledge that he is not a good person, he is now someone evil. From the start, when it says, "Whence is that knocking?" it shows that he's now scared of the noises around the castle. This is a place where he's supposed to feel most comfortable. A home is a place where you are supposed to be entirely at rest, where you are supposed to be in your most comfortable place, where you are supposed to feel at home. Here, he's now scared of every small noise, because he fears discovery. He believes that everyone will know exactly what he's done, and he's going to receive no peace here at all. Then he says, "How is it with me when every noise appalls me?" He is never going to escape from this. Every noise he hears is a reminder that he is no longer the person he used to be. Every noise is a reminder of the guilt that he feels. Every single noise is a reminder that he is somebody who is capable of committing regicide, acting against the king and acting against God. You'll notice that there are lots of questions used here. Lots of questions shows that he no longer has the answers. Macbeth used to know exactly who he was. He was completely comfortable in his role. He never really asked for more before the witches gave him those prophecies. And now he's asking these questions constantly because he is insecure in his own identity. He doesn't know who he is anymore. He used to. Now he's lost. And he says, what hands are here? Imagine him on stage, looking down at his hands, hands that used to serve the king, hands that used to bring glory to the realm, and now they're covered in the blood of his king. Imagine the guilt that he feels, looking down and seeing that red colour, and then think about the symbolism of the red, guilt and evil. And he says, how they pluck out mine eyes. It's almost like he feels so guilty that he wants to rip those eyes out of his sockets so that he can no longer see what he's become. It seems to be that he cannot face his actions. He cannot do anything to turn back time and bring the king back to life. He then uses enormous hyperbolic language, really exaggerated images here. And he says, will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hands? What he's saying is that he will never escape the retribution of his actions. He will never escape his crimes. He knows that. He will never escape his own mental torture either. Because yes, he is absolutely guilty and people will continue to pursue him until they find out who it was. However, his mind is not going to be able to rest either. And what he's suggesting is that of all of the water in the world, Neptune is the king of the sea. He's suggesting that all of the water in the world wouldn't be able to wash his hands clean. Now, literally they would, of course. The blood would come off and his hands would be, literally clear again. However, metaphorically, his hands will never be clean because he will never escape the guilt that he feels. And then consider the juxtaposition to Lady Macbeth, because she trivialised this earlier, and she continues to trivialise it when we see her next. She said in the previous part, go get some water and wash this from you. She's saying a little bit of water will cleanse you. A little bit of water will wash away the guilt, no problem. Macbeth is completely the opposite. He doesn't consider enough water in the world in order to take away the evil that he has committed. And if you look at the symbolism here of, wash this blood clean from my hand, his innocence has been lost forever. He will never have clean hands. He will never be the good warrior that he once was before. He will never be the dutiful soldier. He will always be the traitor. He will always be the person who's committed regicide. And he answers that question himself. He knows that he will never have clear hands again. He says no. And he says, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seas in Encarnadine. What we have is this enormous image. The huge, vast scope of his evil is as big as, all of the seas in the world. And what's going to happen is if he ever does wash his hands in the sea, then the sea is going to be coloured red. And if we consider the symbolism of red, we consider the brutality and guilt and evil that he has committed, because he has stained his innocence and purity. If we consider him as this, this pure figure at the beginning, that can never be seen ever again. He can never ignore the guilt that he has felt. And he would turn the entire oceans of the world from green, and if you think of the symbolism of green, it's very natural imagery. It's something that that can be linked to growth and linked to nature. Here, he's suggesting that the whole sea will turn red if he tries to wash his hands. It's almost like his guilt has repercussions everywhere. He will never be able to escape it, and the world has been hurt by what he's done. He's not just hurt the king, he's not just hurt Scotland, he's hurt the entire world because he's acted against God. Lady Macbeth enters once again. So this part of the speech Macbeth said alone. Lady Macbeth enters, and we can have a look to see how she responds to Macbeth. When Lady Macbeth returns, she says, "My hands are of your colour, but I shame to wear a heart so white." She does here, she insults her husband. First of all, she shows that she is now equally complicit. She has taken as much of a role in this murder as Macbeth has. So she's now stained by the murder as well. She's the same colour as her husband. She is equally as red, equally as guilty, equally as evil. However, Shakespeare then uses the connective but. And that word but shows that whilst they've done the same thing, Lady Macbeth has been able to deal with it in a much better way than Macbeth has. Clearly shows the difference between these two characters. She then uses the words, "I shame to wear a heart so white." Notice how she's using personal pronouns here. We've got the word I to describe herself and the word your colour to describe him. She is not stricken in the same way that Macbeth is. She's saying that he should be ashamed of himself. She would be ashamed if she acted like Macbeth was acting. She's insulting him. She's insulting his masculinity, and she's insulting his mental resolve. She can deal with this, whereas Macbeth cannot. The stronger Lady Macbeth looks, the weaker Macbeth seems to look. We then have the imagery or the metaphor of "to wear a heart so white." She believes that innocence and purity is weakness. It's something that we've seen in all of the other scenes that we've studied together. She thinks that to be white or to be pure or to be innocent is to be weak. She's acted out of personal gain, and now she's sticking to that. The reason why she's killed Duncan is to gain. When she's committed the act, or when he's committed the act, she still realises why she did it. So there's no guilt from her. She doesn't regret what she's done because she knows why she did it. Macbeth almost doesn't realise why they did it. We then have another knock, and that extra knock that happens now increases the noise and increases the movement. We can see that the whole castle is beginning to wake up. Something has been discovered, and that rises the tension. Now, we could also suggest that this constant knocking, these constant noise that weren't there before, we were in a very peaceful night. The only noise we had previously was the owls who were shrieking to try and stop Macbeth, like nature was appalled with what was happening. Now we've got these increased knocks from humanity, and that's to show that the world has been disturbed, and the world is being awoken from this blissful ignorance. We didn't know what happened, now it's about to be discovered. She then says, "I hear a knocking at the south entry. Retire we to our chamber. A little water clears us of this deed." How easy is it then? Your constantly hath left you unattended. What she says here is, "I hear a knocking at the south entry." When Macbeth hears knocks, he doesn't know what they are. He over-magnifies them in his mind. Where Lady Macbeth hears these knockings, she's incredibly precise. She knows exactly where this noise has come from. It's come from the south entry. You'll notice that there's no fear in her voice, only that calculating nature. She's not affected by the emotions. She focuses on finding out exactly where this noise is coming from, is able to link that using her own intelligence, and is able to then plot what they need to do next. She then again commands Macbeth. She says, "Retire we to our chamber." Normally we think of chambers as places of marital bliss, when a man and a woman come together to be comfortable. Here we've got her considering where they need to go from a strategic standpoint. She's not going there to rest, she's going there to appear innocent. She then says, "A little water clears us of this deed," and this immediately makes us think of the hyperbolic imagery that Macbeth has just used. He considers all of Neptune's seas won't be able to cleanse him of what he's done, that he'll turn the green waters into red ones. Here we've got that juxtaposition. Lady Macbeth thinks a little bit of water will clear the guilt away. She also thinks it's easy. How easy is it then? And then she says, your constancy had left you unattended. She then again focuses on the weakness in Macbeth. Macbeth hasn't been able to think clearly, and because he's been so affected, it means that he's unguarded. Lady Macbeth is reminding him of a need to wear that mask she was talking about previously. If you remember when she said, look like the innocent flower? Well, this is that moment. This is when Lady Macbeth realizes that Macbeth is going to give them away unless he can control his body, control his countenance, his face. So what Lady Macbeth is asking her husband to do is to make sure you're looking appropriately, make sure you look innocent, and make sure you act the part when it arises. And again, another knock. Lady Macbeth then continues. She says, hark, more knocking. Get on your nightgown, lest occasion call us and show us to be watchers. Be not lost so poorly in your thoughts. What we see here is this knocking continues, and Lady Macbeth is able to calculate that if they're going to get away with this crime, then they need to look and act in a certain way. So she is ensuring that this deception is believable. She's ensuring that they look the right way in order for people to actually believe them. So what she says is to tell him to essentially get into the clothes that you wear for bed. Make sure that you're looking like someone who's just woken up. Because if we're walking around and we are wearing our outside clothes, people will ask, why were we not sleeping? Why were we not in bed? So what she does is very pragmatically organizes the deception. How are we going to get away with this? We need to look in a certain way. And she says, lest occasion call us. She's saying we need to get into these clothes just in case. Because she wants to build an image of innocence. It's fake, but she's focusing on those details. She's able to look at things and make sure all of the minutiae, all of the tiny little details are all in the right place and all facing in the right direction. And that will show us to be watchers. She wants to feign innocence. And the way to look innocent is to make sure that your appearance is one of innocence. She realizes that the way you are inside can be different to the way you look on the outside. It's a Machiavellian trait. She then says, be not lost so poorly in your thoughts. And again we have the imperative verbs being used, as they've been used all the way through. Because she's trying to break Macbeth's thinking process. She wants to break his contemplation. Because at the moment, this is a man who is lost in his thoughts, who cannot control the way he feels. She knows that you have to think clearly if you're going to be successful. If they're going to get away with this, they can't be stumbling around the place, lost in their own guilt. They need to make sure they're thinking clearly. Lady Macbeth is capable of doing that. She's now encouraging her husband to step up to the plate and to act like the man that he should be. And she considers his thoughts poor. She considers him thinking too much as another weakness, and it's unbecoming of him. She needs to make sure that he is able to control those thoughts, because at the moment he is unable to do that. Lady Macbeth then speaks, and this is the last part of Act 2, Scene 2. He says, to know my deed, 'twere best not know myself. Another knock from within, and then he finishes it with, wake Duncan with thy knocking, I would thou couldst. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are two completely different characters here. Macbeth says, to know my deed, 'twere best not know myself, shows that he is haunted by the knowledge of his crimes. He's never going to be able to get away from these thoughts. Lady Macbeth says, snap out of it. Macbeth says, it's impossible because I know what I've done. He can't get away from that knowledge. And when he says, to know my deed, 'twere best not know myself, what we see here is almost like he doesn't recognize who he is. He doesn't like the person that he's become. It shows that he's self-loathing. He hates the fact that he's done this horrible deed. It's almost like he has to deny reality to escape his deeds. He has to try and pretend to be someone else, because Macbeth has lost his identity. In Act 1, Scene 2, he was the strongest of soldiers. Everyone respected him for it. He said that he was going to, put on those cloaks, put on those clothes, and parade himself in front of everyone so that everyone would respect him. Here, he doesn't even know who he is anymore. He has lost his defining identity, and now he is something different, something that he doesn't like. That knock within shows that we're about to have that moment of discovery. And then Macbeth says, in quite a sombre tone, "Wake Duncan with thy knocking. I would thou couldst." So he says that the amount of noise in the castle now is going to wake people up from their sleep. But he's actually pleading that Duncan will wake up from his death too. He wants Duncan to wake up. He wants to take it all back. And that final part, "I wouldst thou could," it shows his regret. It shows that he wishes to reverse his actions. Wake Duncan up so that I'm not the murderer. He wants to go back to the person that he was before he committed regicide, and he wants to absolve his guilt. So what you can see is Lady Macbeth and Macbeth are acting completely differently in the aftermath of the murder. If we consider the way that Lady Macbeth is presented in this scene, then we can see that she is pragmatic. She is able to deal with the emotions. She is able to make sure that there is a plan to avoid suspicion too. Macbeth is completely the opposite. Macbeth did go through with the plan. However, as soon as regicide was committed, he lost his identity entirely. He doesn't know how to act, and he cannot control his thoughts and emotions. Thank you so much for watching this analysis of Act 2, Scene 2. I hope it's been useful for you. In the next video, we'll look at the next time we see Lady Macbeth, and again consider how she's seen in terms of strength and weakness. Have an utterly delightful day, and I'll see you all in the next video.